Hello and welcome to another edition of Wellbeing on Spectrum Television. Wellbeing is an interactive program designed to encourage a healthy living. I am Mary Joseph. Please do well to follow us on all our social media platforms at Spectrum TV, or you could visit our website at spectrumtv.ng. Do you know that people who inject drugs are one of the groups most affected with HIV, tuberculosis, and viral hepatitis B and C? Well, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, there are about 11 million people who inject drugs globally, and out of that figure, 1.4 million people are living with HIV, and about 39.4% have viral hepatitis C infections. Still from the UNAID reports, injecting drug use accounts for approximately 10% of new HIV infections globally and an estimated 23 to 39% of new hepatitis C viral infections occur among people who inject themselves with drugs. But how much of a problem does this issue constitute in our society, and what can be done to reduce the growing trend? Well, on today's episode of Wellbeing, we will be talking about some of the problems associated with injecting drug use, and to further sensitize the public, I have a guest here in the studio who will be talking more about the issue. But then, let us quickly take this breather. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. It's still the program Wellbeing, your wellness talk show, and this is designed to keep you health conscious. Do remember to follow us on all our social media handles at Spectrum TV, or you could visit our website at spectrumtv.ng to be a part of the family. Today on the show, our focus is on some of the problems associated with injecting drug use. So let's link up with our guest, who is a clinical supervisor and a global trainer for drug demand reduction, where he sheds more light on this issue.
Okay, my name is Ebiti Williams. I'm a clinical supervisor and a global trainer for drug demand reduction. Well, I will put it this way. In Nigeria, there is 14.3% prevalence of substance use. About 14.4 million people are using drugs in Nigeria. Now, to be able to know how much of a problem it is, the global prevalence of substance use is 5.6%. So that means that Nigeria's prevalence is almost 3 times the global prevalence. So Nigeria ranks among the countries with the highest prevalence of substance use. Of course, does not mean that amount of people are having problems, but there is a percentage of those group of people that are actually having problems as a result of substance use. Well, maybe let me put it this way. There are various reasons why people would use drugs in the first place. From the point of using it for fun, using it to manage their own problems, using it to deal with depression, using it to deal with pains. And in many cases, when people become dependent on the drug that they are using, they no more use it for any other reason apart from dealing with the issue of withdrawal, craving, and dependence. So people could use drug for various reasons. Maybe I should just state here what's important for people to know. When people have something like chronic pain, like those that have sickle cell disease and all that, they may use opioid drugs to be able to medicate their pains. And sometimes they could become dependent on this particular kind of drug. So that's just one of the examples of why people may use drugs. Well, in most cases, people that use injecting drugs are actually injecting opioids. These are drugs that are known as opioids. There are drugs that specifically cause euphoria, and in some cases, they may be able to deal with pain. So I just gave you a typical example of someone who is in painful crisis, maybe has a sickle cell disorder or something of that nature. And as a result of that pain, he will use an opioid to deal with the pain. So he keeps injecting himself with the opioid. and then become dependent on it. Of course, there are others that are using these drugs just because they want to get this certain kind of feeling that these opioids gives, which, for example, could be euphoria, a sense of elation. And as a result of this, they may become dependent on it. Well, when you say behavioral effect, do you mean how does this drug affect them? Because when people use drug, they use it for a particular kind of reason. Um, there are some persons that have used drugs, for example, because they want to sleep. And so these drugs makes them to be drowsy and to sleep off. And as a result of that, they will use these kinds of drugs. There are some other persons that use, not specific to injecting drugs now, but there are some persons that may use drugs because they want to be able to stay awake and all that. So you see long distance drivers using some specific kinds of drugs which are stimulant because it stimulates their central nervous system and keeps them awake. And students also do use that to keep them awake so that they'll be able to read and stay for a longer time. There are people that use drugs because they want to alter their sensation and the feeling that they have. Alcohol is an example of such a drug, which results in disinhibition and all that. So, depending on the type of drug, it makes people to behave in a particular kind of manner. And some drugs may even be dependent on the situation in which they are being taken. If people take cannabis in a small dose, it gives them a different effect if they were to take cannabis on a larger dose. Okay, I would say specific for injecting drug use, they are at very high risk of having abscesses, for example, and that may also come from maybe sharing needles or using needles that are not clean needles, and so they may result in infection and then an abscess. In some cases, it may result in HIV, for example, if they were to be sharing needles with other set of persons. They are also more prone to having things like hepatitis if they were to be sharing needles with people who actually have, for example, viral hepatitis. But the one that can result in an instant death in many of them may be something like overdose, because they have taken a particular amount, and because this drug specifically depresses the central nervous system, specifically the respiratory system, it makes it difficult for them to breathe, and so it can result in death of this person. So that is one of the risks that they can have. It can actually result in overdose and death of this individual. The point is, for injecting drug users, if they use needles that have been used by other persons who have either HIV or who have hepatitis, there is a tendency that they can have hepatitis and they can have HIV as a result of that. Another risk factor comes from the fact that when people use drugs of this nature, it alters their senses and they are more prone to high risk behaviors and maybe high risk sexual behaviors. So, not just in injecting drug use, if people use alcohol, it dulls their senses and then it can make them to get involved in sexual practices. Some of them may be involved in multiple sexual activity with multiple partners. And as a result of this, they are more prone to something like STIs, sexually transmitted diseases, HIV or hepatitis, as the case may be. Well, one of such practices is that, first of all, if they are sharing needles, that's a big problem. And that is why the NSP program is supposed to assist people not to share needles, but rather to use new needles. And it's because of all the things that I mentioned with the use of needles, the sharing of needles, the infection and all that kind of thing. So that's an unsafe practice that could happen. Some people may not know how to inject themselves properly. So it could result in using needles that have been used by other people, a needle that is dirty, and then they may have abscesses, maybe because they did not properly clean the area that they're injecting. And if people have multiple abscesses, result in infection, and they could have septicemia, and it can result in many other things. In fact, there are people that they have had to amputate their limbs because of the abscess that they have gotten as a result of, and some other persons may have an emboli, maybe because they do not know how to inject well, they did not remove the air in the column, before injecting, and so they will inject in that air, and that bolus of air may go and cause an emboli either in the brain, in the heart, or in any other place, and that could be a real problem. And then lastly, if you swallow a drug, for example, it may be possible to vomit. It may be possible to give this person something to drink to neutralize it. But when people inject drugs into their system, it goes straight to the brain, and the effect is a lot more quicker. And in the case of opioids that people may use, it can result in death if it is not quickly addressed with the use of another drug, which is more like an antidote that should be able to counter the effect of that drug. Okay, first of all, we have just finished piloting the NSP, which is the needle syringe program. Now, that program refers to giving people new needles so that people do not have to share needles and do not have to maybe contract diseases as a result of sharing needles with people who have similar problems. The other program is the MAT, which is a medically assisted therapy. It is the same thing as OST, which is opioid substitution therapy. Now, what this simply means is that if people are using drugs from the streets like heroin, they are given another kind of drug, like methadone. Okay, this methadone is not injected, but swallowed. Now, by virtue of just replacing it with this drug, we have eliminated all the problems and risks associated with injection. That is one. Secondly, the craving and the dependence liability associated with that drug is much smaller compared to using heroin. Thirdly, when people use heroin from the street and all that, research shows that some of them are associated with criminal activity and so on and so forth. Now, by changing it into the MAD program, it eliminates them getting involved in criminal activity. So these are the various ways that the use of, changing from or getting enrolled in programs like MAD and NSP, is really very beneficial to people who use drugs. There has been a lot of advocacy activity that has gone on in the country in the last couple of years. And that has brought about changes in policy, especially in the NDLEA, which is the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency. And one of you asked for some of the things that have been done. There have been a lot of sensitization activities on drug dependence treatment and care. These sensitization activities have been provided for law enforcement officers like NDLEA and the police, the judiciary, lawyers, legislatures, people in the media, like teachers in schools, and a host of many persons. Now, the drive in this sensitization is to create necessary awareness. All right. The NSP program too has also done the same thing. The NSP program has also created a lot of awareness and it has been piloted. There's going to be a feasibility study for the MAT before this year ends. And that feasibility study would help to understand how feasible is it to implement MAT in Nigeria, for example. And what are some of the things that we need to put in place to be able to do that? So after that, it would actually be. And getting the media to be involved in events like this is also helpful because they get to know about what is happening and they get to propagate the message. So these are some of the activities that is being carried out to create the necessary awareness among people and stakeholders. When we talk about them visiting MAT does not mean that it's going to be residing in the hospital. In fact, the protocol that is developed for the country is that MAT will be services delivered in the community, not necessarily in hospitals. Okay, so we're hoping that within the communities, it can be a one-stop shop, it can be a DIC, which is just a drop-in center, There may be support from general hospitals, there may be support from other places to these centers, but the implementing side for this program would be within the community so that people can access these services without feeling that sense of stigma with people feeling able to go to the hospital for these services. Well, stigma is a big issue, not just in Nigeria, all over the world. I would say it's a work in progress. A lot of improvement has gone on over the years, but we are not yet there, all right? There are a lot more treatment centers that have been provided. The Federal Ministry of Health directed that every treatment center in the country, every teaching hospital in the country must, as a necessity, have something like naloxone in their emergency box. Now that is a way of saying that we recognize this group of people, we recognize their challenges, and they need to be treated. The federal government has also provided support for services, for people who use drugs. The United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime have done tremendous work supporting civil society organizations to set up drug treatment centers and drop-in centers. They have also supported government-owned establishments like drug units within federal neuropsychiatric hospital and set up model treatment centers. So yes, a lot is going on, but it's still not enough because Nigeria is a very big country with over 200 million people. And so if we have 14.4 million people who are using drugs, so you can imagine the amount of people, how many millions of people in Nigeria, that are likely using drugs. And then there's a substantial percentage of those group of people who actually have a drug problem. So we don't really have enough facility to adequately cater to them, because we are hoping that we'll be able to have facilities in primary healthcare centers and within the community. That is the hallmark, rather than having facilities in teaching hospitals, in federal neuropsychiatric hospitals. That is not enough to cater for this group of people. Well, first of all, what we have always advised the government over time is that government, both at state and the federal level, should support the primary healthcare centers to integrate services for people who use drugs. Because every person who uses drugs comes from a community, and the primary healthcare centers are closest to the people. When government want to set up facilities, our suggestion to government is that rather than build one mega facility somewhere in one state that people may not be able to go to, that will cost hundreds of billions of naira, for example, why not spread that amount of money into primary healthcare centers and set up drop-in centers, integrate services into primary healthcare centers, so that wherever people are, they can access services. There are a lot of community service organizations that are working within the community. They should strengthen this community service organization to be able to do much more than what they're doing. By doing that, a lot more people would be reached, because putting resources into law enforcement does not help. For example, the money that the US government spends on tackling drug problem in terms of law enforcement is much more than the entire annual budget of Nigeria. Yet, US is having the greatest opioid crisis with opioids dead. So it is not the amount of money that people pump into law enforcement that makes the difference, but it is money that they pump into care and into prevention. And that's the second thing that I want to say. The government will need to do more prevention. Right now, the government is doing almost absolutely nothing in prevention. Prevention will require targeting people in schools, secondary schools and all that, so that they never start to use drugs in the first place. And of course, prevention is much more than those educational activities. Prevention is a whole mark which would have to do with, beyond education, employment, the community, how do people's living standards, and all those things play a huge role in terms of people using drugs. And if you have to look at prevention activities, the government may need to think in that realm. But even if they are not able to go that far. At least carrying out some prevention activities within schools can be a major factor. Of course, when I say prevention activities, I don't mean people going out telling children, say no to drugs, because that doesn't work. I'm talking about real prevention programs in school, and they are prevention programs that research has shown to work. And that's the advice that we have for the government. Okay, good. Now, first of all, I do not believe that the use of drugs is actually a criminal offense or a criminal problem. That's for a start. But we would want law enforcement officers to see drug problem as a public health problem and not a criminal justice problem. Because when they see drug problem as a criminal justice problem, the approach to it is different from if they were to see it as a public health problem. As a public health problem, and that's one of the things that we are trying to do, and that's one of the manuals that we are developing for law enforcement officers, so that they can also get involved in assisting this population of people who are using drugs and possibly have problems as a result of their drugs, to see it more from a public health problem rather than a criminal justice problem. Good. One of the things that I would say is that there is actually help that is available. That is one. And the most hospitals now, they can get this help. If people go online, they may see many of the places where services can be provided. The second thing that I want to say to people who use drugs is that it is possible, abstinence is possible. It is possible for people to recover from drug use. And no matter what they do, so they can recover. And of course, there are helplines that is now being set up, where people can call and then talk about it. And there is a specific helpline that has been set up by the NDLEA. But the reason why I don't want to talk about that helpline is that there are a lot of things associated with that helpline. But of course, the Federal Ministry of Health is also working on setting up something in relation to that.
So that was Dr. Ebiti Williams, who is a clinical supervisor and a global trainer for drug demand reduction. And we were talking about some of the problems associated with injecting drug use, as it is one of the leading causes of new HIV infections, tuberculosis and viral hepatitis. He, however, advised the government to support primary healthcare centers across the country to integrate services that would cater for the needs of persons who inject drugs in terms of care and treatment. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Do remember that you can also be a part of the family by following us on all our social media platforms at Spectrum TV, or you could visit our website at spectrumtv.ng to be a part of the family. Join us next week for another edition of Wellbeing. My name is Mary Joseph. Until we meet again, remember that HIV is real. Get tested, know your status to gain control of your life.